Have you ever found yourself completely exhausted from being the perfect partner, only to watch him pull away when he should be stepping closer? You have likely spent your entire life believing that unconditional kindness, endless patience, and constant availability are the definitive keys to a man's heart. Yet time and time again, this exhausting effort leaves you feeling entirely invisible and utterly unappreciated. Today, we must address the painful reality of the good girl trap. We are going to explore exactly why your excess of light feminine energy is secretly destroying his romantic attraction, and how you accidentally transitioned from being his magnetic queen into his maternal caretaker. If you are entirely tired of giving your absolute all to men who offer you nothing but breadcrumbs in return, you must drop everything and listen closely. Welcome to Destiny's Decree. There is a fundamental difference between being a deeply supportive, high-value partner and inadvertently becoming a man's secondary mother. From a very young age, society heavily conditions women to equate love with absolute self-sacrifice, pushing you into a permanent, imbalanced state of the light feminine. You genuinely believe that by anticipating his every need, endlessly managing his emotions, and gracefully forgiving his consistent lack of effort, you are proving your undeniable worth as a lifelong partner. However, in the unforgiving and highly instinctual realm of male psychology, this well-intentioned dynamic is entirely counterproductive to genuine emotional attraction. When you seamlessly step into the role of the caretaker, constantly soothing him and demanding absolutely nothing in return, you completely destroy the vital energetic polarity of the relationship. He begins to view you not as the elusive, deeply magnetic prize he must actively pursue, but rather as a comforting, entirely predictable safety net that he can easily take for granted. You become a reliable source of maternal comfort, but you tragically lose your status as a romantic challenge. A man may feel incredibly comfortable around a woman who constantly mothers him, but he will rarely feel that visceral, consuming desire for her. To reclaim your divine feminine power, you must completely abandon the illusion that your endless, exhausting acts of service will eventually be rewarded with his burning devotion. True magnetism requires a stark absence of coddling, elegantly forcing him to stand firmly on his own 2 feet if he wishes to have the immense privilege of standing beside you. It is one of the most maddening paradoxes within dating. You do absolutely everything right, yet his interest seemingly evaporates into thin air. You never start an argument, you enthusiastically agree with all of his plans, and your schedule is always remarkably flexible just to accommodate his last-minute requests. You believe this flawless, frictionless behavior makes you the ultimate dream woman. However, in the realm of male psychology, a complete lack of challenge is the absolute fastest route to profound boredom. Men are biologically and psychologically wired for the thrill of the chase. They inherently value that which requires consistent effort, strategy, and risk to attain. When you eliminate all the friction from the dynamic by being entirely predictable and endlessly agreeable, the game essentially ends. He no longer has to wonder what you are thinking, nor does he need to strategize on how to impress you, because your unwavering approval is already a guaranteed certainty. Without the subtle, thrilling risk that you might disagree, say no, or simply walk away, the vital tension required to sustain emotional attraction completely dies. He slips into a dangerous zone of comfort, and his romantic energy quickly begins to stagnate, explaining exactly why he pulled away when everything seemed so peaceful on the surface. A high-value woman intuitively understands that her yes only carries profound weight because she is entirely unafraid to employ her no. If your presence is a permanent, unconditional guarantee, regardless of his actual behavior, your value in his eyes subconsciously plummets. You must realize that a man's respect and deep-seated attraction are fundamentally built upon the quiet, underlying knowledge that you are a sovereign being with your own mind, your own boundaries, and a life that does not constantly orbit around his approval. When you stop acting like a predictable convenience, you force him to wake up from his complacency. Let us now address a rather uncomfortable yet entirely necessary truth. Very often, what you perceive as your boundless kindness and endless capacity to forgive is actually a deeply ingrained trauma response, gracefully disguised as compassion. In psychological terms, this over-accommodation is frequently linked to a profound, silent fear of abandonment. You constantly bend over backwards to please a man, not out of genuine, overflowing generosity, but because you are terrified that if you dare to establish a firm boundary or express a dissenting opinion, he will simply walk away. You are pouring your precious energy into the connection from a place of sheer emotional scarcity, mistakenly believing that you can essentially buy his loyalty through endless self-sacrifice. However, within the subtle, unspoken dynamics of male psychology, this anxious energy is highly palpable. A man can subconsciously feel when your goodness is laced with the desperate, unspoken demand for him to stay. It does not feel light or magnetic to him. It feels incredibly heavy and suffocating. This energetic imbalance actively destroys emotional attraction because he knows he holds absolute power over your emotional state. He realizes you are staying because he is treating you like a queen, but because you are simply too afraid to be alone. A true high-value woman operates on a completely different frequency. She gives exclusively from a place of robust internal abundance, never from the gripping terror of losing a partner. To fully anchor yourself in your divine feminine power, you must courageously confront this hidden wound, realizing that genuine devotion cannot be purchased by abandoning your own needs. You must stop using your kindness as a shield against rejection. Healing this pattern is the crucial step that allows you to transition from being overly accessible to establishing a new, highly exclusive dynamic, one where your presence requires a rather strict admission fee. The transition away from the exhausting good girl syndrome does not require you to suddenly become cold, arrogant, or deliberately difficult. In fact, reacting with bitterness or unnecessary hostility is merely a different manifestation of deep-seated insecurity. Instead, a true high-value woman elegantly adopts the concept of the velvet rope. I want you to picture an incredibly exclusive high-end private establishment in Mayfair. The staff standing at the entrance are always exceptionally polite, impeccably well-mannered, and entirely calm. However, if a gentleman does not meet the strict dress code or lacks the proper invitation, the velvet rope simply does not open. There is no shouting, no dramatic negotiation, just a polite, unyielding denial of access. You must begin to apply this exact sovereign philosophy to your own divine feminine energy. You can absolutely remain a perfect lady, gracious, warm, and highly sophisticated. However, your profound emotional depth, your unwavering loyalty, and your precious, limited time must be securely positioned behind that velvet rope. If a man approaches you offering only low-effort communication or entirely empty promises, you do not lower your standards to accommodate his laziness. You do not argue with him, nor do you draft lengthy emotional texts explaining his flaws or demanding to know why he pulled away. You simply smile, remain perfectly polite, and keep the velvet rope firmly closed. You must radically and unapologetically cease over-investing your precious energy into any dynamic where there is an absolute lack of genuine reciprocity. A man's access to your inner world must be earned through consistent, undeniable action. By graciously holding this boundary, you preserve your internal peace and communicate your immense worth without ever needing to raise your voice. This quiet, unshakable standard forces a profound shift in the relationship, leading us to the final, most powerful stage of this energetic transformation. The moment you fully retire the exhausted good girl persona and firmly establish your velvet rope, a rather magnificent shift in polarity occurs within the connection. Initially, he will be struck by a profound sense of confusion. He is entirely accustomed to your endless accommodations and your immediate anxious forgiveness. When you suddenly respond to his lack of effort with polite, unbothered silence rather than frantic pursuit, it completely short-circuits his psychological expectations. He will quickly realize that his previous low-effort tactics no longer yield the comforting validation he once so heavily relied upon. This initial confusion rapidly transforms into a deep, undeniable respect. In the unforgiving landscape of male psychology, men categorically do not respect what they can effortlessly manipulate or take for granted. By demonstrating that you are perfectly willing to walk away from anything that fails to meet your immaculate standard, you instantly trigger his latent primal instinct to pursue. He suddenly understands that your continued presence is no longer a guaranteed right, but a highly exclusive privilege. It is at this exact moment that he faces a critical, unavoidable choice. He must either permanently step up and radically elevate his standard of behavior, or he must step entirely aside. This is the ultimate power of abandoning the light feminine extreme. You no longer politely accept emotional breadcrumbs, and as a result, you command an absolute feast of devotion. Ultimately, my dear, stepping down from the exhausting role of the endless caretaker is the most profound act of self-love a high-value woman can possibly perform. You were not born to be an unpaid therapist or a maternal safety net for a grown man. You were born to be fiercely respected, deeply desired, and treated like an absolute queen. Now, I have a rather vital question for you. What specific good girl habit are you firmly leaving behind today? Let me know in the comments below, as I always read every single one. If you are ready to fully embrace your sovereignty and rewrite the rules of the game, ensure you subscribe to Destiny's Decree and ring the notification bell. We have much more to uncover. Until next time, keep your standards impeccably high and your velvet rope firmly closed.